Good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are from. We are officially in a Tier 0 format, which in Yu-Gi-Oh terms means that the representation of a deck in a certain tournament converting to a top cut and eventually also winning is extremely high. Most people put it around 75%. We've had two major but kind of different tournaments this weekend. We had the Undisputed UDS Championship, which was only 16 players, but the absolute best of the best. And we also have had a 3v3 YCS in Costa Rica, which is also a 3v3 tournament, which is a little bit different than individual YCS. It's also in Latin America, which tends to have kind of different results sometimes. But alas, we have seen Snake Eye, Fire King, ruling both areas, ruling this championship that you can see right here, which eventually Jesse Cotton won with Fire King Snake Eye, and also the Costa Rica YCS. So this is a bit of a thoughts video, stream of consciousness, discussing what I think about the situation right now, and why I think it's not necessarily as bad as you think. I think people tend to have some sort of hate or dislike towards Tier 0 formats. And there's good reason to have these feelings towards this one specifically. But I think people tend to not like the fact that the game decides what strategy they need to play, instead of them choosing the one that fits their playstyle or their favorite or the one they find most fun. Because if you just look at the last format before Phantom Nightmare, you saw that we've had extremely diverse formats up until Phantom Nightmare, for a few formats even. We've had top 8s that consisted of 8 different decks, and it was fun. It was extremely fun because you can play whatever you like. In a Tier 0 format, you are sort of like closed into a box where the assumption is if you don't play the best deck, which is the Tier 0 deck, you don't stand a chance. So I'm making this video to maybe discuss some of these points and see how realistic they actually are, see if they are in fact true, and if you have some ways to play around it. I think the first thing I want to talk about is the accessibility of this deck, because this is the worst part of a Tier 0 format, is that if the decks are extremely expensive, which they are, it is very, very hard for players to deal with. So let's take the Snake Eyes Fire King deck. You have an engine of about 14 cards. 3 Wanteds, Diabell Star, SPL 9, Promethean Princess, Poplar, and Bonfire. Just 14 pieces of cardboard adding up to around $1,000, and this is just around a quarter of the deck in terms of the amount of cards. So you already have an extremely high price point, very, very high, for a Tier 0 deck, which means that in order to compete or feel like you have a chance in competing, because you don't necessarily have to play the deck, but in terms of probability, you will have the best chances with the Fire King Snake Eye. You will have to spend a lot of money. And this is the main thing that is different in this format. Not the only thing, but the main thing that is different between this format and Tearlament's Ishizu Tier 0 format, because Tearlament's Ishizu wasn't expensive as Fire King Snake Eye. It was not as expensive. What does this actually mean? It means that a lot of people will be feeling like they are priced out of playing big tournaments. If you have a YCS around your state, in your country, you might be discouraged to go to it if you cannot afford the deck, because travel also takes a long time, even for regionals, not only for YCSs. Sometimes in the US, for example, you have to drive and sleep over another place in order to participate in a regional that is a few hours away. That adds up to a deck that is already expensive. Some people cannot afford it. So you have cards like Little Knight and Bonfire over $120 at this point, which is rough. So the difference between Tier Shizu format and this format is that Tier Shizu wasn't expensive. everybody could pick it up, most likely. I mean, Pearl Rhinos were a little bit expensive, but it definitely wasn't as expensive as Fire King Snake Eye. And you just had to decide. I personally sat out the format completely because I wanted to play Branded, and this is the deck I wanted to play. And I couldn't play it during that format because it was unplayable. So I had a few months of, a break from actually playing the game. Trying to come up with different strategies because I decided I was not buying tier limits. Eventually I did when they were on the down low after Kid Kalos got banned. So this is the one difference from that format. The second difference, and I think this is personally more problematic for me than the price issue, is that this tier 0 format, based on the results and everything that we saw here, and the games, we saw a lot of very high level games in the UDS championship. Like, you don't, usually when you have like a stream in feature matches, you don't see that level of gameplay. But now you had 9 rounds of the best players on the planet displaying the deck. Nothing better than that, right? So another difference, feels like that this is a die roll format. It kind of seems like that. In terms of statistics, I think around 70% or 80% of the feature matches that we saw where the person who won the die roll won the match as well. And it is very different from, this is not one of these games, by the way, but this is very different from what we had in tier limits format, where one player placed a card on the board and it all went haywire from there. Both players played on both turns, and this is not what happens now. This is another problem, in my opinion, where in tier limits format, winning the die roll didn't matter. It was about mills, it was also luck, but it was also about a great display of skill. Now, it's much harder to break a board going uphill against Fire King, which is also a problem for me. So the price thing, the die roll thing, I think the price thing might be individual for like different people. Some people may afford it, some people may not. But the die roll thing, I think, is much more problematic because at its core, it is a game design problem. So where do we go from here? We only started, by the way. We have Vegas in next week, end of this week, maybe next weekend. And this is going to be exciting. We're going to be streaming. We're going to be doing content. We're going to be doing another podcast, another episode of Table Zero with Fi. So stick around for that and follow on Twitch. But the main thing is that going forward, now it's getting a little bit scary. Is there a ban list coming? Is there an emergency ban list coming? I personally think not. If you look at the OCG, and we try to do that a lot, especially here, and we do the meta duelist breakdowns that have all the meta representation in the OCG, you can see that Fire King has not been hit in the OCG whatsoever. The only fire deck that has been hit is Rescue Ace, and it kind of died down, obviously, because it was significantly hit. But fire decks have been out for a while. They are one set ahead of us, Legacy of Destruction, and fires have been around for two sets-ish, like Phantom Nightmare, the full rotation of release, no hits, 0. So, and we're starting to see Voiceless Voice on the up and up because they got a little bit of support in Legacy of Destruction. Fire King did not. So, could the price point make a difference in terms of ban list? I'm not exactly sure. I don't really know. There's no clear answer, obviously. But I would say that there's a little bit more probability that something like this happens in the TCG rather than the OCG. The OCG cards are cheap. You can hit them fast, but they didn't. But here, there's a real problem and an outcry that, okay, people cried about the deck being expensive with good reason. But now if it's a tier 0 format, it makes it a lot worse because you also feel like there's no reason for you to compete if you cannot afford it. So you are essentially, I hate that term, but you are officially priced out of the game. What do I suggest if you are one of those people? First of all, I suggest looking at where you're actually playing Yu-Gi-Oh! So if you are not going to YCSs and you are going to relatively smaller regionals, or even if your locals is hyper competitive, I get that a lot in the comments, like, hey, my locals is all meta, what am I supposed to do? It's not even locals. Well, I would suggest a deck like Branded. I think Branded is probably your best bet if you're on a budget right now. But otherwise, I feel you. I feel you because I've been there in tier limited Shizu format. So if you want to sit this one out, I definitely feel you and feel for you because it doesn't feel great. And I hope there's some change that comes from it. But I'm also a little bit excited to play this format because I enjoy playing this deck. I enjoy the fact that some other decks are also viable. So I think people are also, and this is my last point, also a little bit blinded by the tier 0 representation in these two events, that they are now sort of throwing all their cards, they're giving up, they're like, this is it. I'm not sure. This might be a biased representation. This is two very specific and small tournaments. Wait for Vegas, even though I agree, and I think factually this is the best deck and the strongest deck, I think it might not be the same when we look at Vegas. So don't give up yet. And I hope Konami doesn't give up yet too. Leave your thoughts below on this. What are you thinking ahead of the format? And we're going to do a lot of content on this very soon. We're going to be live on Wednesday, so 2 days from now, around 9 a.m. Pacific-ish. And we're going to do a recording of the podcast, episode 2 of the Table Zero podcast. It's going to be exciting, tier 0 stuff, so it's going to be really cool. Thank you so much for watching. Comments below, like, subscribe. See you in the next one. Peace.